Welcome to Fun with Annuities with your host, me, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent. Can annuities be fun? Can contractual guarantees be fun? Absolutely they can. Find out the brutal facts about annuities with no sales pitches or high-pressure nonsense. Just the brutal and factual annuity truth, which is all you need to hear. Let's have some fun with annuities, and let's have that fun start right now. Welcome to Fun with Annuities. I'm your host, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent, licensed in all 50 states. We have a repeat guest on back by popular demand. I've got a bunch of emails recently like, where's Bob? Bring Bob back on. And the Bob I'm talking about is Bob Carlson, who is just a superstar in our industry. I'll have all this stuff on our site, just like I did the last few times he's been with us. But, you know, we have Bob on when things are a little bit chaotic. First of all, welcome back to Fun with Annuities, Bob Carlson. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here, Stan.
Excellent. Let's jump right in.
All right.
Let's jump right into Social Security. And I get so many questions, Bob, about the financial solvency and you know, all of that stuff. And I know that the latest annual report from the trustees was issued in June. Forget what everyone else says. I want to hear what Bob Carlson says about that, because you read it from cover to cover and you can put it into English for the rest of us out here. So go.
Okay, well, the good news in the headlines is that the retirement trust fund is supposed to last a year longer. In the 2021 report, the trustees said it would last only through the year 2033. And when the report came out in June of this year, they extended it a year to 2034. So that's the good news. But,
Okay.
you know, this is a forecast. It's based on assumptions. So you have to look at the assumptions. And there are a couple assumptions in there, at least a couple, that are kind of questionable. One is inflation. You know, the COLA for benefits in 2022 was, I think, 5.8%.
Right.
And for some reason in this latest report, they estimated that the COLA for 2023 would be like 3%, something like that. Very low, lower than today's inflation rate, lower than the 2022 COLA.
Right.
And then they estimated it's going to quickly drop down to the mid twos and stay around 2.3, 2.4 indefinitely. So, you know, we already know the chief actuary gave a press conference when the report was issued and said he's already thinking that the 2023 COLA is going to be 8%, about twice what's forecast in the report. So we already know Social Security is going to pay more in 2023 in benefits than is in the report. So that's going to reduce the life expectancy of the retirement fund. Another factor in there is the birth rate. As you probably know, the birth rate in the U.S. has been declining for a long time. And for some reason in the assumptions last year and again this year, they assumed it's going to go up. And it's going to go up higher than the current rate. And of course, the way they've done it, they expect this to happen overnight. So it's not going to happen overnight. And you know, the way the birth rate helps the fund is it produces more future workers who pay more taxes and make the economy more productive. So we're not going to reach the birth rate that's assumed in the report anytime soon. So those are just two factors in there that make you question whether it's really going to last through 2034 as projected in this report.
And why did they do that, Bob? I mean, why would they know that people like you are going to read it and my listeners are going to listen to people like you? So why would they do that?
It's kind of a mystery. If you ask them, they'll say, well, our forecasts are done over a 75-year horizon. And we think this is reasonable over a 75-year horizon. I think what probably actually happened is, you know, they kind of sat down and said, well, we got to end up with a certain number in the end. What do we have to do to get to that number? But if you ask them, they'll say over 75 years, we think these are reasonable assumptions and that they'll be achieved.
Who we're talking to is Bob Carlson. He's the founder of Retirement watch.com, all one word. We'll have that link on our site. If you don't have it in your favorites, it needs to be immediately. If you haven't subscribed, you need to do it immediately, because he is a straight shooter with an IQ that's off the scale, but he has the talent to bring it down so that you understand it. Bob, these inflation numbers, I was listening to a Peter Schiff podcast the other day, and some people like him, some people don't like him. You know, me and you both know Peter from our days at speaking at money shows and things like that. He just thinks that the inflation numbers are actually double what's being reported. What's your take on real inflation at this point?
Yeah, there are several ways people measure it. One thing people like to point out is back in the 80s or the 90s, they changed how several things were computed in the CPI, particularly housing.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have gone and recomputed today's data using the old methodology and say, the CPI today would be significantly higher if we use that old measure instead of the current measure, and that people brought the government changed that measure primarily to reduce things like the COLA and Social Security and other benefit programs. And then there's other measures. People will say, well, it's based on a basket of goods and services. You buy a certain percentage of each good and service, and you get the price increase of each of those, and you come up with the final CPI. So some people say the COLA, the basket of goods and services, isn't really reflective of what a lot of people buy, particularly the elderly. There's a separate index they call experimental for the elderly, which spends more on medicine and a few other things, less on education and some other items. And that's always come in higher than the regular CPI. So certainly people who are older are facing a higher CPI than the one that's published. So there are a lot of different people who are tearing this data apart and in forecasting are basically saying that the reported CPI you see in newspapers each month or on the websites you check is really lower than what you're probably experiencing.
Do you see do you see the Fed and what they're doing now? Do you think it will affect inflation, or did they wait too long? If Bob Carlson was Fed czar during these last 2 years, I'm assuming you would have done things differently. A, what would you have done? And B, what they're doing now, what do you think is going to be the result?
Right. A couple of years ago, I was telling my readers to buy inflation hedges, that inflation was going to go up because of all this money that's being printed and so forth. And so they obviously, the Fed has its own economists who do their own forecasts, and they have a history of missing all the key turning points in the economy and letting inflation get too high and then overdoing the efforts to bring it down and triggering a bigger recession than they needed to.
Right.
So you kind of depend on that. And back when all the Fed people were saying this is transitory inflation, I was among some of those people who are saying this is not transitory. There are certain things baked in there, and the Fed's making it worse by buying all this government debt and putting more money into the markets and the economy. And what the Fed kind of counted on, what's been happening for most of the last 15 or 20 years, is they do print a lot of money and put it out there. But in the past, it's basically gone into the investment markets. It's why stock prices went up much faster than economic growth. And I guess they were counting on that happening again, where they would push up housing and stock prices and some other assets, but not goods and services that people buy. But they were wrong this time, and people finally stopped putting that money into investments, started putting it into goods and services, and pushed up the prices of that. You couple that with the way supply chains shut down during COVID, reduced the supply, the labor supply decreased, so there's fewer people to hire. You have to pay higher wages. So it just started a big cycle that's going to take really serious efforts, I think, to break the cycle. They're going to have to really tighten and do what economists call demand destruction, where they're going to have to raise interest rates enough and take enough money out of the economy where people just stop buying so many goods and services, and that's going to hurt a number of businesses where people cut back. But eventually, that's what's needed to bring down this kind of inflation.
Do you believe that the Fed will act autonomously like they should and like they were designed to do and continue with the rate hikes that they have announced? Or do you think they'll be bullied by the political party and power? You know, and I'm not political either way. What's your prediction on how Chairman Powell will be handling this going forward?
Yeah, so far in his tenure, he's been very much in line with who's ever running the government.
Yes.
And if he needs to take the strong action, as I suspect, to really bring inflation down to their target of 2%, I think he's going to give up partway through. They're going to get to say 4%, give or take a percent, and jobless rates is going to go up. The economy is going to be slowing down. And they're just going to announce that they're going to accept a higher target of inflation, stop tightening the money supply somewhere in that 3 to 5% inflation range, and start loosening it up to get people back to work. And so now you're going to have a new floor on inflation. And so it'll go up probably faster than it did last time, the way it's done, faster than it's done the last 15 or 20 years. And so probably we're going to have some level of higher inflation baked into the economy until they finally get to the point where they're willing to accept the amount of pain that's needed to basically correct the errors they put in place.
Bob, you didn't mention Mr. Putin, good friend of ours from Russia, because a lot of this blame is politically is being placed on him. Who knows what the war effort that he's waging against Ukraine is having on a lot of things. But is that significant?
It's a factor. I wouldn't say it's significant.
Okay.
The inflation was rising well before he announced plans to invade. It probably caused energy prices to go up faster than they would have, and they've come down the last month or so to be back probably where they would have been absent the invasion. Same with some of the food and grain commodities that spiked earlier have come down some recently, or are still higher than they were. So it's a factor. Some of that's corrected, but it's certainly not the main factor because, as I said, inflation was rising pretty steadily before the war even happened. And there are a lot of things rising in price that are just completely independent, particularly services in the US. And that's a factor of a combination of a shrinking labor force where businesses can't hire enough people, so they have to keep increasing wages to hire and retain people. Mm-hmm. And also the high demand because so much money was put out there. Savings went up a lot during the COVID pandemic with all the stimulus programs. And also these wage increases, the people who are working and getting them, they have extra money to spend. So that's just pushing up the prices.
Do you think gas prices are kind of at a new normal? I mean, I just can't see them going back down for a myriad of reasons, but hopefully I'm wrong. But it just feels like we're at a new normal with gas prices in that $3 to $5 range, I guess. That's a big range, but still pretty darn expensive.
Yeah, and one factor we haven't discussed is the climate change policies, and these are global. Yeah. And basically the people supporting them want higher gas prices because they want people to start looking for alternatives to gas and related types of energy. So, in addition to demand and supply, we have these public policies around the globe that are determined to keep those prices from going down.
And a lot of those countries that have been proactive with those policies, they're getting caught a little bit here. I believe Germany would be a good example of that. Right. So I think, we have to tread lightly. Yes, we all want, a cleaner, wonderful world, but I think reality gets in the way a little bit. But with that being said, and not to get on political box here, but even if we are acting perfectly environmentally, we need China and India and everyone else to act well as compatriots in the environmental challenge, or else it doesn't work at all. Do you agree with that?
Right, and that's been part of the problem is the developed Western nations have been putting the policies in place, whereas the other nations are not willing to accept the consequences of making those changes, or at least not on the same schedule that the developed nations are.
Right.
And so they're continuing to burn coal and use other forms of energy that are considered to contribute to global warming and climate change. So it's a problem where the West has basically taken this burden on itself, and the others have not been willing to cooperate.
Seems like that's kind of the way it always is, right? You sent me an email recently. There's a Pew study, and I kind of glanced at it. And it was about people with their 401ks making mistakes, rolling it to IRAs after they leave their employer. And I wanted you to kind of go over the pros and cons of when a person is at that decision and fork in the road of rolling their 401k. One of the reasons, go to retirementwatch.com, sign up for what Bob offers. These are the type of things he addresses, real world scenarios that are solutions that you can apply to your specific situation. Can you talk about that in detail?
Sure. What the study did was it looked at the consequences. Well, first, the most common IRA transaction is the rollover. There are a lot of different rollovers. One tax expert went through the tax code and said there's more than 30 different kinds of rollovers.
How many?
More than 30.
Wow.
And there's a lot of things you don't think of as rollovers that are called rollovers. For example, when you convert a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, in a tax code, that's a rollover. But the most common rollover is when someone leaves a job, they take their 401k account and have it rolled over to either an IRA or to their new employer's 401k.
Right.
And and I used to routinely say, well, you should do that because most of these 401k plans are inferior to IRAs. And what the Pew study did is it looked at...
Stop for a second. Hold that. When you say that, tell the people why you believe that. Is it because the IRA structure allows you freedom of choice for investments as opposed to the limitations within the 401k?
Well, first, that's what I used to say. It's not always true now.
Okay.
But there were two factors. One is the investment flexibility.
Right.
And the other was costs.
Gotcha.
10 or more years ago, most employers did not put a lot of effort in their 401k plans. It was just something they felt they had to offer. And particularly at small or mid-sized businesses, they'd go to a broker or an insurance person and say, set up a plan for me. And these plans would have a lot of fees and not great investment options. More recently, a lot of the employers, particularly your larger employers, but also many mid-sized and smaller ones, have realized these are valuable benefits.
Yeah.
A lot of prospective employees will look at the plan before making a decision whether or not to accept a job offer. So you have good investment options in many of these plans and low expenses. And that was what the Pew study focused on.
Okay.
Many of the 401k plans now offer what they call the institutional shares of mutual funds.
Right. Explain that to the people. Yeah.
Right. Most mutual funds have what they call different share classes. They all invest in the same fund. They have the same investments, but they have different minimum investment amounts. And in particular, they have different expenses. The institutional share classes have the lowest expenses. These are if a major pension fund or endowment wants to invest in the fund, they will get the institutional shares. But typically, you have to have a minimum investment of $1 million to get into the institutional share class. But many of the 401k plans are allowed to offer the institutional shares because when you aggregate all their employees together, they're going to have $1 million or more in that fund. So they'll be allowed to have each of the employees buy the institutional shares, even though they might only be putting in $100 or so a month into a fund. Now, if you roll over from your 401k to an IRA, unless you have a really big 401k, you're not going to have access to the institutional shares.
Yep.
You're going to have to buy the retail shares, which have the highest expenses. And the Pew study compared the cost difference over 25 years between owning the institutional shares and owning the retail shares. And it found out that many people, if they do a rollover, are going to cost themselves $20,000 or more. I think it looked at an average account balance of $250,000, which is what people typically accumulate in a 401k over an average working career and an average salary. And so if you have an average 401k, they estimate it's going to cost you about $20,000 over your lifetime in your retirement fund to move from those institutional shares to retail shares. So that's the big issue when you're leaving an employer, whether you're retiring or looking at a new job. You want to compare the 401k to your IRA options or your new employer's options, because you have the option to take that money, roll it over somewhere, tax-free transaction, or leave it in that 401k. And so you want to look at, number one, the investment options. Does the current 401k have a good diversified mix that's going to have all the types of investments you're going to want to invest in over time? And number two, is it low cost? You want to look first at the shares of the fund. Are you getting institutional shares, low cost shares? And then also look at any different fees that are charged. A lot of 401ks charge you an annual account maintenance fees. Some will charge for different transactions, whereas an IRA might not. So you want to look at all these factors, consider what you might do with that money over time, and decide, are you going to be better off leaving that money in this 401k or rolling it over to an IRA?
Sounds like also, if you're a registered investment advisor or master of the universe, whatever you're going to call it, it's also a fiduciary issue, I'm assuming, correct?
Well, this is the whole nother topic, because the both the SEC and the Department of Labor have been looking at rollovers and rollover advisors for the last 5 to 10 years. They've issued different regulations. The Obama administration issued a set of regulations. The Trump administration withdrew them and issued new ones. The Biden people came in and issued another set. But basically, advisors who advise on what to do with your retirement account have a new level of standards that they have to comply with if they want to give advice and not get in trouble. And the larger firms have no trouble with this, but some of your smaller and medium-sized advisors have said, I don't have the resources to generate all this data that these regulations are requiring. So a number of them have just said, I will not advise someone on whether or not to do a rollover. If they do a rollover, I'll be advising them on how to invest and that sort of thing.
Wow.
Whether or not to do the rollover, I just legally don't feel I can get involved.
Because you and I both know rollovers is like chum in the water in the financial business, because it's money in motion, as they say. And everyone's trying to get in front of that from the standpoint of managing it or whatever. But I think you're correct. It doesn't mean you have to move the money. And from a competitive nature, these companies are making their plans a lot more user-friendly, and you might want to stay. I haven't really thought about that until you sent me that email with the study. I'm like, well, that makes sense for them to try to keep it and try to keep it in-house and offer really good choices. And advisors got to be real careful here. They really do. They can get in trouble.
It's really interesting how the employers have changed over time, as they used to not pay any attention to it. And then someone pointed out to them. In fact, they didn't want to deal with former employees. They were happy to have the former employees take the money away. But then it was pointed out, if you keep that money, you have a bigger plan, you can drive down costs.
Correct.
And just make your plan more attractive to employees.
Plus, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
throw everything away. It is the right thing to do. Let's pivot a little bit. I know that you have your red phone into DC, and the people in DC trust you and what you write. Once again, retirementwatch.com. Again, retirementwatch.com, all one word. We'll have that link on our site. But Bob has been doing this for a long, long time. And I remember in the last podcast we had, it was 8 or 9 months ago that me and you were together. We talked about the Secure 2.0 Act, Bob, and you said I remember you saying it's got some potential to be okay, but I think it's become a little bit messy between then and now. Can you explain what's gone on and the mess that's occurred since we've spoken?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. As you recall, the original Secure Act in 2019 it passed the House in May with 3 or 4 dissenting votes, and then was brought up in the Senate late in the year in December, passed basically with no dissenting votes, and went to the president, was signed.
Right.
And I thought the same thing was going to happen this time with Secure Act 2.0. It passed the House again in the spring, very few dissenting votes. But then it got to the Senate, and first of all, some outside people started to complain. They looked at a number of provisions in the bill, and they said, this all favors rich people. You say it's to help average people save more for retirement, but the provisions we're looking at primarily going to favor rich people, and there's just a little bit for average and poorer people.
Surprise, right, Bob? I mean, sometimes that just kind of happens like that, right?
Yeah, when the financial service industry is lobbying for something, who do you think they're going to lobby for?
I agree. I agree.
So they started to complain, and also there are some key senators who said, well, last time we just did what the House wanted, just to get something passed. But this time, we have ideas. And there were something like 1,000 different bills that had put into the Senate the last 2 years. And they went through them all and picked and chose, which ones people liked. And so they've put together not one, but 2 different bills in the Senate.
Okay.
And those are still not been voted on the floor. They're hoping to do that perhaps this fall. But it's not clear what'll make it into the final bill or when it will be passed. And then even when that happens, it's going to differ from what passed the House. And the House is going to decide, are we just going to accept the Senate bill, or are we going to have to go to a conference committee and trade back and forth to get a final bill? So it's not going to roll through the way Secure Act 1.0 did. There's still a lot of people supporting it, very little opposition to the idea and most of the provisions in either of these packages. But when it's going to get through and what the final version is going to be is very much up in the air.
What's holding it up? Is it the volume of changes? Is it upcoming midterms, or a combination of everything?
Well, there's not a big difference between all the versions going around, but there are differences. And, each person insists their version is the best one.
Of course.
And, there's so many different provisions, so many people involved, a bunch of people are going to have to say, all right, we'll have yours and not mine. And
that's tough in DC, Bob.
Yeah. And so that's really what's going on, is just really disagreement about nuances for the most part.
I know Ed Slott has come out, and if you don't know who Ed is, he's a really smart dude, just like Bob, and focuses on kind of the IRA world. Wouldn't you say that, Bob? What Ed does?
Yes.
And I don't think he's too thrilled at all about what's in there.
Yeah, he's had criticisms of several of the provisions, and there's things he thinks should be in there that are not there. And for the most part, first of all, it's going to complicate an already complicated area of the tax code.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take people a while to figure out what's going on. And then the IRS and Department of Labor are going to have to issue regulations. So even though a lot of these provisions are designed to increase retirement savings.
Mm-hmm.
Really, no business is going to change its retirement plan or its decision of whether or not to offer a retirement plan until not only the law is passed, but the regulations are issued. So you're looking at a 2 to 3 year time frame, assuming the law passes this year, before people really know what the rules are going to be and what the benefits and disadvantages are going to be.
And the problem with all types of legislation like this that comes out of DC is there will be stories trickling out about provisions that have yet to be passed, of which then people call people like me and you and ask about taking advantage of it, of which I say it's not passed yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates a lot of confusion, which is the reason I always say, if you're going to get that type of tax advice, you need to be going to retirementwatch.com, reading Bob's stuff, working with your local CPA and tax lawyer, because just because they're rumored to pass it doesn't mean it's passed, which means you shouldn't be planning around something that's not passed. And I think that's the problem. That's what drives me crazy is I really wish they wouldn't talk about it until they just pass it, but that's not DC, right?
And a lot of times once it's passed, false stories go out about what's in there.
No doubt.
And I'll get contacted by people saying, hey, I heard this passed. How can I take advantage of it? I say that's not in the law.
Yet, maybe, right? Bob, one of the things you specialize in, you specialize in a lot of things, expert in a lot of areas, but one of the things I lean on you for is just kind of looking at estate plans, estate planning specifics. One of the things that you and I were recently talking about were digital assets. First of all, I want you to talk to the people about what a digital asset is. They might not even know they have it.
Mm-hmm.
And then how to include that digital asset within their estate plan. I know that I understand this pretty well because I'm pretty well versed in intellectual property with a lot of the side things that I do in my life other than being Stan the annuity man. But a lot of that does involve digital assets. Can you cover that from an estate planning standpoint? Because I think this is fascinating blue water, new ground for people to think about.
Yeah, this is really one of the leading edge issues in estate planning. And even just 10 years ago, the law was way behind reality. And only recently have the states started to enact provisions where you could actually reasonably provide for digital assets in your estate plan. But now the key is you have to do that. Digital assets are a much broader category than people realize. Basically there's a federal privacy law and a lot of state laws that say you can't access someone else's digital assets or accounts. It's a federal crime. And so you have to authorize people to do that.
So what are digital assets? Give the people the 30,000 foot view of what those are.
You start with your cell phone, your email accounts, any websites or social sites where you have accounts on them. Those are the first layer of them.
Not that you own the sites, that you have accounts at the sites, right?
Right.
Huh.
Basically any kind of electronic, either website or asset that's password protected by you. That's a digital asset.
So a footprint, whatever your footprint is digitally,
right? And
you need to think about protecting it, right?
Right, and that's the first layer of digital assets. Another layer are accounts, like your financial accounts. Many people access them online. They have passwords and usernames. Under the old law, if you're a state executive or even a family member, if they had your password and they went to do a transaction in your account, that was a federal crime.
Yep.
Even if you told them and put in your will, you could do that. So that's another layer. It's all your financial accounts that have some kind of online access that's protected. Then also, a lot of people, you have your automatic payments, whether it's drawn from your checking account, put on your credit card, done some other way.
Wow.
That's a digital asset. Someone has to know about it, and then you have to authorize them to shut it off. And so there's a wide range of these assets. And, it starts with your cell phone, because with many of these accounts now, they have the two-factor authentication. So you not only have your password to get on it online, but
Right.
then they send another password to your phone, they text it to your phone, and you've got to enter that. So people have to be able to access your cell phone and then access your other accounts.
But how's that part of the estate plan, Bob?
Well, you have to put in your will or your living trust who can access these assets.
Holy mackerel. There's an addendum to the estate plan that you're saying that people need to revisit that has these passwords that's in the estate plan, in the trust, that you give the authorization of who to ask.
Right.
Like an executor of a will or executor of a trust, it'd be executor of digital assets.
Yeah, the law that was passed in
Wow.
most states recently says that the executor automatically is legally allowed to access certain types of accounts. But it's a short list. But many of the other types of accounts, it's silent about. So you have to specifically authorize access to those as well. And then, so that's the easy part. The easy part is putting in your will or trust language that says, my executor can access these assets, or you can make it broad and say, can access all my digital assets and accounts. Some people don't want to do that. They want to separate it. They want only a family member they trust to access their email, and then forward to the executor anything financially related.
What if they don't do that? Does digital assets go through probate?
They don't particularly go through probate because most of them aren't really worth anything. But you have to authorize someone to access it. If you don't, then basically someone has to contact the provider of that asset.
Which is a mess.
They will have their own rules. And what some people used to do before this new law is they would have to hire techies to break into the accounts.
Right.
So that, it's a whole mess. So the first rule is put the language in your will or living trust about who can access your digital assets. But that's only the first step, because the important step is people have to know which digital assets and accounts you have. You have to write down your accounts, the access information, the automatic payments. That's a big issue, because some of these automatic payments, they're annual, they're not monthly. You can't just go through your monthly checking account or credit card bill and remember it. You might forget about these annual ones. So
I need to stop for a second, because I need to have people need to take a breath, because this is one that everybody listening is going, huh? And you're thinking about it. Just a personal note, I'm obsessive compulsive, so I do this immediately. I have a 20 to 25 page printed password thing that I put in a safe, and I update it and tear the other one up and shred and put it in the safe. But I don't have the automatic payments on there, so I've got to do that. But I also haven't included that. I've done that from the standpoint of, hey, if I die, here's the password. But I do think it's important for people to have access. You tell who has access to it, and then I own websites and things like that, and domain names and all kinds of stuff. I think going forward, I think people's digital assets will be more and more. And you're not even talking about non-fungible tokens and all kinds of nonsense like that. You're talking about day-to-day digital life that we all have, regardless of how non-techie or techie you are, right?
Correct. Yeah. And even people who consider themselves non-techie, they have a lot more of these digital assets than they realize. Even non-technical people, most of them have a cell phone, they have some automatic payments, social media to some extent, email account. So, you really need to sit down and list these. Many people,
it's hard.
They don't have an organized list of their websites and passwords that, they can really access. They count on memorizing it. maybe using the same password for multiple
Which
accounts.
isn't a good idea. And
Right.
memorizing is not a good idea because there's been hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin going poof because people couldn't remember their passcode. I think that the task of the day for the listeners and viewers of this podcast is, if you have an estate planning lawyer, if you don't, go get one. But if you have one, lob that call in and go, hey, I'd like to put together a meeting because I was listening to Bob Carlson from Retirement Watch, and he said that we need to do an addendum to the trust on the digital assets, and just shut up and see what they say.
Yeah. No, most of the estate planners are well aware of this, and
really,
they're anxious to get people doing it. But the first step is you need an inventory of what your digital assets are with all the access information, so that someone, basically you need to set it up so someone off the street can walk in and access these accounts if they have your inventory, so that it'll be easy to do. They won't have to hire some techie to do it for them. And then you can go to the lawyer and say, I want my executor to have access to all of these. Or you might say, I want only my spouse to be able to access these, and my executor to access those. It's a personal decision, so people will do it different ways.
I love it.
But the first step there is make that inventory. And it might take you a while because there are things out there you're probably going to forget. And maybe an automatic payment's not going to show up for a few months, or there's something, a website perhaps you only visit occasionally, and you realize, gee, I've got that. I've got to add it to the list.
Well, I also think too, not to get morbidly motivational, but we're all looking at cognitive decline eventually. And it's just another reminder of trying to be proactive and getting in front of that puck going down the ice and getting all of this tied up in a nice bow. The lawyers are going to love it because you're going to have to see them more, like every year, just to make sure that all the things are updated. But that's a really neat way to, when you pass away, that there's no issues, that you know where everything is. And from a peace of mind standpoint, looking at money and estate planning, it makes sense. I always tell people that even when you retire with 10,000 baby boomers hitting age 65 every single month, or every single day, excuse me, part of your part-time job are these types of items that Bob just mentioned. You've got to get your arms around them.
Yeah.
So that's phenomenal. Do you have any neat stories about digital asset stuff that you've seen, or anecdotes that you've heard?
The main thing is, before they put the recent law changes into effect, was that two things would happen. One is the executor would contact someone like Facebook or a website and say, hey, my dad died, I need to shut down his page, or I just need access to his account. And they'd say, sorry, there's a federal law that says only the owner of that account can access it, and we can't give you anything. And then from there, people would basically try to hire techies to break into the account, or they'd search through the house looking for where the password was written down, see if they could find it. So this is a great favor. This is how you decide how much you love your family. Is
that's true.
Are you going to take the time to sit down and write this stuff down, or are you going to leave them a big electronic mess that's going to take a lot of time and effort to resolve, and might not eventually be resolved? There might be missing assets, or you might have a lot of difficulty shutting off some automatic payments because no one's been authorized to do it.
Well, the other thing too, in the world that we live in now, it's hard to get people on the phone. Can I get a hallelujah on that? So to have the digital access to the accounts allows you to, do what you need to do without trying to get somebody on the phone. And that somebody on the phone, even if you get them, they might not be from here. It could be really hard. But I think that is, that's one of the best pieces of information. That there might be people listening to this or viewing this that go, oh, I knew that, Stan. Come on, where you been? But I'm pretty techy, and I've got my team is pretty well teched. but when you live in that world, you don't really think about it. It's kind of like the mechanic driving the car that's beat up because they know that if it breaks down, they can just fix it.
Mhm.
But you got to think about, if you're savvy technology wise, probably your heirs are not, or your spouse is not, or whoever's going to be executor is not. Bob, would you see executor of the will and executor of digital assets? Could that be, could that be two different people?
It could be. Basically, it's wide open for you to do what's ever comfortable for you, but keeping in mind, of course, that the executor who's processing most of the estate,
Mm-hmm.
there's probably digital assets he or she needs access to or needs authority over in order to settle the estate. But there might be other things you have. Some people, for example, are running a website based on a hobby they have.
Right.
Perhaps the executor doesn't need access to that. You would just want to give that to someone who also has an interest in it and might want to continue it. Some people, they don't want to give their executor access to their email because there might be things in there they want only a spouse or someone else to see, and they just count on that person to forward any financial related
Interesting.
emails
Goodness
to the executor.
gracious.
So it depends on how complicated your life is.
What kind of nefarious sites you go to, what type of logins you have. I know it might unearth some things that you don't want to unearth. It might make you think twice, but that's really interesting. What else is new out there, Bob? You get up every day and you slay it and you're fantastic at what you do, but you've forgotten more than most people ever know. So what's new out there that kind of is getting your attention, or is there anything new?
Well, going with the things you talk about, there's a lot of interest in the various annuities. It used to be, people didn't have a lot of interest in them. Stocks were going up 20% a year. But now, with bonds going down, stocks going down, one thing I've told my readers is basically any kind of bond or fixed income investment you've had in your portfolio, you should get rid of it because it's going down in value, and you should put the money into some kind of annuity, whether it's a MIGA or just a fixed rate annuity.
We don't mention companies obviously here, but
Right.
but the bond, people just need to understand with the bonds, interest rates, go up and the bond valuations go down. That's just basic stuff that you need to know. And people also need to know that bonds can go down in value. And at the time of this taping, current interest rates do lean you toward MIGAs, which are fixed rate annuities, the annuity industry's version of a CD. And we certainly have that on my site at theannuityman.com. I don't want to go in some annuity rabbit hole here, but the rates are at a point where it's starting to make sense again, Bob. Went almost a decade where fixed rates weren't attractive, but now they're getting to the point where people can start thinking about living off some of that interest and not touching the principal, which is really good. I'm not going to make you predict interest rates here, but do you think we're going to keep going up over the next year like they said, or do you think, my predictions, I think Chairman Powell has one or two bullets left in the gun, and then they're going to take the gun away?
Yeah, most likely they're going to do one or two more and then see what the effects are.
Yeah.
But one thing I see a lot of research on that surprises a lot of people is, your standard investment portfolio is 60% stocks, 40% bonds.
Right.
And, that's said to be diversified. And when the stocks are going down, the bonds will be steady or even go up, plus they're generating interest.
Sure.
And that's been true for 20 or so years, where they've been what they call uncorrelated. They go in different directions. But this year, they've both been highly correlated, and both stocks and bonds are going down at the wrong time, at the same time. So people who were in these balanced portfolios thinking they had some protection from the bonds if the stocks went down, they don't have that though. The bonds in many cases are down almost as much as the stocks, depending on which you own of the two different asset classes, which particular types of stocks and bonds. But, this is, people just kind of thought stocks and bonds are uncorrelated. If I own some of each, I'm always protected. But things change over time, and we're in a different environment. With inflation going up and interest rates going up, both stocks and bonds are going down at the same time, and people need to rethink what is a diversified portfolio and what's going to protect me in tough times.
Yeah, I've taken a lot of heat. I've had on crypto, because I've had some people on and we kind of poo-pooed it at 60,000, we poo-pooed it at 50, and we kind of triple poo-pooed it at 40. And it's probably going to go to 1 million, and I'm going to be wrong. But what scares me about that are the people that are buying it aren't sophisticated and they don't really know what they're buying. Any thoughts and insights on the whole crypto situation here, Bob? Because you're like me, you've been around a long time. You've seen it all.
Yeah, people say crypto like it's all just one thing.
I know, like annuities, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Even when you just look at the cryptocurrencies, there are a lot of different ones with
Definitely
different things behind them.
20,000 at the time of this taping, 20,000+.
But, the real thing to keep in mind is it's not necessarily the particular cryptocurrency, but what's making this go is the blockchain technology.
Correct.
That's behind it. And for the future, Bitcoin and the other currencies, they might or might not last. They might make you some money, but what you really need to look at if you're interested in this area are how is the blockchain technology being used? What are the different companies out there that have some innovative ways to profit from it, to make it part of people's everyday lives?
Correct.
And look at that rather than what the headlines are about how Bitcoin and the others are doing. Just
I agree.
Look at the companies, how they're using this technology. Is it going to work going forward? Probably one of the biggest issues for blockchain technology is it uses a lot of energy because it involves a lot of people using computers. It basically involves a bunch of people checking on each other online, verifying their different numbers. And that's been one of the criticisms about it, is that it uses a lot of energy, contributes to the climate change and all that. So it's going to be interesting going forward. How is the legislation about climate change and things going to affect how people can use blockchain technology?
I agree with that. I agree with that totally. And I know that the healthcare sector, the transportation sector, you can find companies that are utilizing the blockchain technology from the standpoint of tracking and et cetera, et cetera. My conspiracy theory is the Treasury will come out with their own form of cryptocurrency, and then that's how we'll be taxed real time on a daily basis, and there won't be any more April 15th. I do know that the annuity life insurance side is looking at that from the standpoint of trackability and just the transparency nature of the blockchain technology. I think it's the future, and I think you're correct. I think people are getting caught looking at crypto and Bitcoin and Ethereum and all those names, and you just, wait a minute, stop. It's kind of like, remember when the web came out, web stuff, and there was MySpace and AOL.com. Those people really aren't players anymore, but the web is. So you need to look at it similar. Bob, we're coming up on the kind of the end of this thing, as I always do, and I'm going to do this again with you, is our mic drop moment, which I'm going to ask you to say something unbelievably poignant and to the point where the people walk away and go, wow, that was fantastic. So no pressure at all, of course. So with that being said, Bob Carlson, mic drop moment, go.
Well, most of the things I discuss in Retirement Watch and my other work, it's the finances of your retirement. And when most people think of retirement, they think of their finances, their investments, and so forth. But that's really one of the least important factors in deciding whether or not you have a successful retirement. Because, being financially secure and independent, that's fine. That's kind of the baseline thing. But after a point, the money doesn't matter. And surveys of retirees show that that point is lower than many people realize.
Yeah, it is.
So what matters is whether you have a satisfying retirement. And for that, you look at non-financial things. And that's the most neglected part of retirement planning, is many people focus on the financial part and not the non-financial part, which is going to be the main factor. You need several things. You need a purpose in retirement. Many people, their jobs was their purpose. It's what they're tied up in. You need a new purpose. And it doesn't have to be one purpose. It doesn't even have to be big things.
Yeah.
But things like, taking care of your yard, having good relationships. It's work to have and establish and maintain good relationships.
No doubt.
Things like that. So, many people think, well, I have this long list of activities I'm going to do in retirement. And that lasts for a while. You have what they call the retirement honeymoon. It might be a few months, might be a few years.
Yep.
But after a while, you've gone through that list and you're in the day-to-day routine.
That's right.
And that's where many people kind of lose it in retirement. It's why if you do a web search for things like depression, substance abuse, suicide among 65 and older, for most of these, you'll find that they're more prevalent in 65 and older, and it's increasing. And it's because they go into retirement without a plan for the non-financial life, and they just get bored and depressed, and they fall into bad habits and things of that nature. And what people who've studied this have found is one of the critical things is that you have a lot of social contacts. You should have 3 or more people other than your spouse with whom you have a close relationship. And you should, on a regular basis, have contact in different social groups, whether it's going to church or clubs or playing golf or tennis with friends. You need to have these things on your schedule. So when you're approaching retirement, you need to consider, what is my typical day going to be? What is my typical week going to be? When you're working, most of your time is determined for you and it's scheduled. You stop working, you have all this time to fill it. Commuting time, the time at work. Basically your weekdays were filled or determined by work. You have your weekends where you did a lot of things you couldn't do during the week, but you retire and you have all this extra time. And initially that's going to be really great for you, but eventually it's going to be something where you have to work to determine what makes you happy, what makes you fulfilled, what gives you a purpose in retirement other than just being financially secure.
And that's Bob Carlson. Take inventory of your finances and take inventory of your life. Definitely. Bob, I appreciate you joining us. We'll definitely have you on once again. I want to thank everyone on all the major podcast platforms to listening to Fun with Annuities, and the people that are watching us on the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel. I will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Fun with Annuities. Please hit the subscribe button and make sure to go to my site at theannuityman.com, where you can run your own SPIA, DIA, and QLAC quotes and see a live feed of the best MYGA fixed rates in the country, and even get indexed and income rider quotes as well. You can also sign up for my 6 Annuity Owner's Manual books, and I'll ship them for free and under no obligation. I also encourage you to schedule a one-on-one call with me, Stan the Annuity Man, so we can have a full discussion of your specific situation. It will be the best brutally factual and truthful advice you will ever get, and that's one guarantee you should definitely take advantage of. So join me next time for the #1 annuity podcast on the planet, Fun with Annuities.